I don't think I did anything wrong. I just thought honesty would make us closer. But that photo, one stupid photo from our trip, made my whole life collapse in public. It wasn't supposed to prove anything. It was supposed to be a memory. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Isola Merren, and I don't think I did anything wrong. I just wanted our family to look happy for once. That's all the trip was supposed to be. A week by the sea with friends, some photos, a little fun after months of stress. But one picture ruined everything. It was just a candid shot, the kind you post without thinking. Me laughing, Cole beside me, and little Lila between us, her hat tilted, her smile wide. I didn't notice how much she looked like him until everyone else did. People online love a scandal. They zoomed in, compared faces, made their jokes. And Evan, my husband, he didn't yell, didn't accuse. He just got quiet. That silence scared me more than shouting ever could. I told myself he was being paranoid, that people see what they want to see. I deleted the comments, blocked a few accounts, kept smiling. But Evan's calm got colder. He started leaving earlier, coming home later, writing things down, like every moment was part of some plan. I told my mother he was overreacting. She said men hate embarrassment more than betrayal. Maybe she was right, because now, that single photo feels like proof of something I can't undo. The photo was still trending when I walked into the office that Monday. Everyone pretended not to look at me, but I could feel their eyes following me to the coffee machine. Someone had printed the image and pinned it to the bulletin board like it was a magazine cover. Me laughing in the sun, Cole's hand resting lightly on Lila's shoulder. The three of us looking picture perfect. No one said anything out loud, but the silence was its own kind of performance. Mara was the first to break it. She whispered that the photo had gone viral on a parenting page, that people were comparing Lila's eyes to Cole's. I laughed and said people online will compare anything if they're bored enough. Mara didn't laugh. She just gave me that pitying look I hate, the one that says she wants gossip but doesn't want to look cruel getting it. I told her to stop reading comments. They were written by strangers with nothing better to do. She said she wasn't reading anymore. I didn't believe her. At my desk, I pretended to work while scrolling through the notifications. It was the same photo again and again, reposted by accounts I didn't even follow. The captions varied, some joking, some outright accusing. I saw one that said, "That's not the husband, right?" And another, "The resemblance is uncanny." My heart did that heavy drop thing for a second, but I smiled anyway because I wasn't going to let random people ruin my day. When I got home that evening, the kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning spray. Evan was sitting at the table with his laptop open. He didn't look up when I walked in. I said hello, asked if he'd seen the post. He said yes, quietly, without emotion. I told him it was ridiculous, that people were twisting a harmless photo into something ugly. He nodded, still not looking at me. I said, "You're not actually taking this seriously, are you?" He closed his laptop, stood, and said, "I'm not taking it anywhere." Then he rinsed his mug and set it on the far side of the counter, the opposite end from mine. That's how it started. The mugs on separate sides, the little distances he built like invisible walls. At dinner, Lila asked if we could print the beach photo for her scrapbook. I froze for a second, then said, maybe later. Evan didn't say anything. He just kept cutting her food into tiny squares the way he always did. I told myself he was sulking. That's what I told my mother later on the phone too. She said men like Evan always act cold when they feel embarrassed. I told her he wasn't embarrassed, just dramatic. She laughed softly and said, "He's an architect, dear. They build things, even their revenge." I didn't like that word, revenge. It sounded too serious for what was basically online gossip. That night, after Lila was asleep, I sat on the couch scrolling again. The comments had doubled. Someone had tagged a gossip blog that wrote a post titled, "When a family photo becomes DNA evidence." I laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. Evan came into the living room just as I was laughing. He looked at the screen, then at me. I said, "You can relax. Nobody actually believes that nonsense." He said, "People usually believe what they see." I told him that was cynical. He said, "It's realistic." I hated how calm he sounded, how every word came out like a quiet fact. I snapped and said he was acting like a victim. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. "A victim of what?" he asked. I said, "Of your own insecurity." He nodded once, almost as if he agreed, then walked to the guest room. The door clicked shut. In the morning, I noticed he'd already made coffee and left. His mug was rinsed and turned upside down beside the sink again. Lila's breakfast was prepared neatly on a plate, fruit sliced in perfect triangles. I felt irritated by how composed everything looked, like even the kitchen was taking his side. When I dropped Lila off at preschool, one of the other moms smiled too widely at me. She said she'd seen our vacation pictures and that Lila was just adorable. The way she said "just" sounded sharp, like there was another word she wanted to use but swallowed instead. I spent the rest of the day trying not to open my phone, but of course I did. Cole had untagged himself from all the posts. That annoyed me more than the comments did. It made him look guilty. I sent him a message. "You didn't have to hide. People are making drama out of nothing." He replied, "I'm just staying low for now. Don't worry." That reply stung. I wanted him to defend me, to post something saying the photo was innocent. Instead, he disappeared, like I'd handed him a scandal he didn't ask for. That evening, Evan was already home when I arrived. He was on his laptop again, the screen angled away. I asked what he was working on. He said, "Just organizing things." I joked that he should teach me how to stay that neat. He said, "You organize stories. I organize facts." I didn't know what to say to that, so I changed the subject. At dinner, he asked if I'd called the daycare to confirm Lila's field trip. I said no, not yet. He said, "I already did." Then he took out a small notepad and wrote something down. I asked what it was. He said, "Just keeping track of what's been handled." His tone was calm, but the words made my chest tighten. Later, when he went to the shower, I peeked at his laptop. The screen was open to a spreadsheet. No titles, just dates and short descriptions. March 2nd, post upload. March 3rd, public comments. March 4th, untag. It looked like evidence. I closed it quickly before he came out. That night, I told myself he was documenting things because he needed control. I'd read about men like that in articles, emotionally rigid types who can't handle embarrassment. I told myself I was the strong one, the stable one, the realist. Still, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that spreadsheet, about how precise his notes were. Around midnight, I heard the soft hum of the printer from the guest room. I got up quietly, opened the door a crack, and saw him collecting pages. He noticed me and said, "Couldn't sleep?" I said, "Neither can you, apparently." He said, "Some things are easier to print while they're fresh." In the morning, he left early again. I found a sticky note on the fridge that said, "Lila's lunch packed. Meeting. Personal, 3:45 p.m. I rolled my eyes. Who labels their own appointments like that? At work, Mara came by my desk, holding her phone. She said the gossip page had started speculating that Evan might not be Lila's father. I told her to stop feeding the fire. She said she thought I should issue a statement, maybe post something about family unity. I said, "I'm not giving strangers explanations. They'll move on to the next story by tomorrow." She looked doubtful. That night, I tried to talk to Evan again. I said we needed to present a united front, post something together, maybe a new photo. He said, "Truth doesn't need performance." I said, "You sound like you're writing a press release." He said, "You sound like you're managing damage." I threw up my hands and said, "Fine, don't help me, but don't act shocked when people believe lies." He said quietly, "They're not all lies." I turned toward him, ready to fight, but he just picked up his keys and walked out. He came home late. I pretended to be asleep when he climbed into bed. I felt the mattress dip slightly, but no warmth reached my side. The next morning, he was gone before dawn. The space beside me looked untouched. Lila came into the room holding her stuffed rabbit and asked if Daddy was mad. I said no, Daddy was just busy. She said, but he sleeps in the quiet room now. I told her that's where Daddy worked. She nodded like that made sense and went to get her cereal. While she ate, I scrolled through my messages again. Cole had sent one at midnight. Maybe we should lay low for a bit. I typed back, it's not like we did anything wrong. Then I deleted it before sending. When I left for work, I noticed Evan's car wasn't in the driveway. I also noticed the garage shelves were suddenly tidy. Boxes labeled in his neat handwriting. Household, utilities, bank. He'd never labeled anything before. For a second, I wondered if he was planning to move out, but I shook the thought away. He was too responsible for something that impulsive. At the office, Mara asked if I was okay. I said yes, just tired. She said the story had slowed down, but not disappeared. Someone had made a side-by-side of Cole and Lila. I forced a laugh and said, let them waste their time. Inside, though, my stomach twisted. That evening, Evan was home again, sorting mail at the kitchen counter. I asked how his day was. He said fine. I asked about his personal meeting. He said, productive. When I pressed, he only said, you'll find out soon enough. I laughed like it was a joke, but his tone wasn't joking. He folded the mail neatly, placed it in a small pile and said, I'll be in the study. When he closed the door, I sat at the table alone, staring at our half-empty wine glasses from the night before. The house felt quiet, too organized, too balanced, like something was being prepared in plain sight, and I was the only one pretending not to see it. I told myself again that I hadn't done anything wrong, that people twist stories, that a photo doesn't mean proof. I said it out loud once, softly, to the empty kitchen. It was just a photo. But even as I said it, my voice sounded unsure. By the end of that week, everyone at work was treating me like a rumor. They smiled too wide, spoke too softly, and changed the subject whenever I walked into the break room. I kept telling myself it was just temporary, that the internet would move on, but the story wasn't dying. Someone had dug up an older photo from a company picnic and compared it side by side with the beach picture. Same smile, same eyes. One caption read, I wanted to scream at how stupid it all was. Evan and I had been together for almost a decade, and suddenly, the whole world decided they knew our life better than we did. When I got home that Friday, the house looked like a showroom. Everything was too clean, too organized, too silent. Evan was sitting on the couch with his laptop open again. The lamp beside him cast a soft light on his face, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for him. He looked so calm it was infuriating. I said, You're awfully quiet these days. He said, You're awfully loud online. I told him that was unfair, that I'd barely posted anything since the trip. He said, You don't have to post when others do it for you. I hated how he said things that made me feel cornered without ever raising his voice. I tried to change the subject, asked if he'd eaten. He said yes. I asked if he'd eaten with someone. He said, with my thoughts. That made me laugh, even though he didn't mean it to be funny. I said he was turning into a philosopher, and he said, no, just someone who likes clarity. Then he closed his laptop and went to the kitchen, rinsed his mug, and left it upside down on his side of the counter again. The small gestures were driving me crazy. The neatness, the quiet routines, the way he turned everything into a record. I wanted him to fight me, to show some emotion, anything that could make me feel like we were still a normal couple, and not two strangers living in a museum. Instead, he acted like every word I said was being archived. Maybe it was. Saturday morning, my mother came over. Daphne was always the type who believed she could fix anything with a bit of charm and a long talk. She walked in carrying muffins and a soft, pitying smile. She said she'd read some of the comments, but not to worry. People online were jealous. You look too happy, too free. It threatens them, she said. I told her Evan didn't see it that way. She sighed, said men like him mistake composure for morality. I didn't really know what that meant, but it sounded like something I could agree with. Evan came downstairs halfway through her speech. He greeted her politely, kissed Lila on the forehead, then poured himself coffee. He didn't look at either of us while doing it. My mother said, "You're quiet as ever, Evan. You know, silence can make things worse." He smiled faintly and said, "Sometimes silence is the only space left." I rolled my eyes. My mother tried to cover the tension with another muffin. When she left, I turned on him. I said he was making us look ridiculous, that if he'd just defend me publicly, this would blow over. He said, "You want a performance, not peace." I said, "I want my life back." He said, "Then stop pretending this one didn't happen." I called Mara that evening to vent. She suggested we go out, have a drink, clear my head. I agreed. The rooftop bar she chose was packed, a mix of co-workers and strangers, pretending to be glamorous under string lights. I dressed in something tight enough to remind myself I still looked good. When we got there, people were already whispering. I caught pieces of conversation. My name, Cole's name, the word photo. I ordered 2 drinks and laughed louder than usual, as if volume could drown out rumor. Halfway through the night, Cole showed up. I hadn't invited him, but of course Mara had. He looked nervous at first, then relaxed when he saw me smiling. I told him we needed to act normal, that giving people a show would only make it worse. He said, "You always did like attention." I said, "And you always did like pretending you didn't." For a few minutes it almost felt like before the comments, before Evan's silence, before I started waking up in a cold bed. When the bartender brought another round, someone from the next table raised a phone and took a photo. I saw the flash. I told myself it was just random, not aimed at us. But when I checked later, I saw a post already online. Me and Cole side by side again. The caption read, "Round 2. Evan didn't say a word when I got home. He was sitting at the table, the same posture, the same half-lit lamp, laptop open. I said, "You've been waiting up?" He said, "I've been working." I asked what on. He said, "Details." I told him that was vague. He said, "So is truth when you bend it." I lost it then. I accused him of enjoying the drama, of wanting me to feel guilty for something that wasn't even real. He said, "You think guilt comes from what others believe. It doesn't. It comes from what you know." I called him cruel, said he was punishing me. He said, "Punishment implies anger. I'm just done debating reality." Then he stood up, closed his laptop, and went to the guest room again. The next morning, I found a folder on his desk labeled Household. Inside were copies of bills, bank statements, even warranty receipts. Everything was organized, highlighted, dated. I asked why he was suddenly so meticulous. He said, "Clarity helps when people forget what's real." I laughed, said he was acting like a lawyer. He didn't laugh back. He said, "Lawyers write so the truth can't be rewritten later." Then he locked the drawer with a small key. That weekend, Lila stayed at my mother's house. The silence without her made the house feel empty. I tried to fill it with music, with cleaning, with wine, but it all felt hollow. I messaged Cole again, asked why he'd gone quiet. He replied that he didn't want to make things worse, that Evan had every right to be upset. I told him Evan was just dramatic, that this would pass. He said, "He's not acting dramatic, he's acting deliberate." That word, deliberate, made me uneasy. Monday morning, when I dropped by the kitchen, Evan was already dressed for work, tie straight, expression unreadable. He said, "You have plans today?" I said I might grab lunch with Mara. He said, "Keep it short. The office will be watching." It sounded less like advice and more like instruction. At lunch, Mara said everyone noticed how calm Evan seemed. She called it creepy calm. I told her he was always like that, just logical. She said logic looks a lot like strategy when a man starts printing things. I didn't know whether to laugh or feel scared. That evening, I noticed new labels on the files in the study. Bank, utilities, insurance, education. I asked what education meant. He said, "It's about Lila." I said, "What about her?" He said, "Future planning." He didn't elaborate. Before bed, I told him I was tired of the tension, that I wanted us to move forward. He said, "Moving forward requires knowing where you are." I said, "We're here, married, family." He said, "You keep saying that like it makes it true." I tried to touch his arm, but he stepped back slightly, not enough to look rude, just enough to make the message clear. I went to bed furious. Around midnight, I heard a faint whirring sound again from the guest room, the printer. I almost got up to confront him, but didn't. Instead, I lay awake imagining him printing out my life page by page. The next morning, I found another sticky note on the fridge. Downtown 10:10 a.m. The time was too exact to be random. I asked him if it was another meeting. He said, "Yes, personal." I said, "You're getting a lot of personal meetings lately." He said, "They help me stay organized." At work, I got an email from HR reminding everyone about appropriate online behavior. The message didn't mention names, but I knew who it was for. I could feel the shift in how people looked at me. I texted Evan angrily. "Did you tell them something?" He replied, "No, they saw something." That night, he came home early, made himself dinner, and washed his plate immediately afterward. I asked if he wanted to talk. He said, "Talking stopped working." I asked, "So what's next then?" He looked at me for a moment and said, "Next is clarity." Then he walked away, leaving his phone face down on the counter. When he left the room, the screen lit up briefly. I saw a message preview that said, "File received successfully." My stomach turned. I told myself it was work stuff, nothing more. Later, I called my mother again. I told her Evan was planning something, maybe moving money, maybe just trying to scare me. She said I should remind him who he married, that men forget women have charm as a weapon. "Smile," she said. "He'll melt." So when he came into the kitchen that night, I tried. I smiled, offered him a glass of wine. He looked at it, then at me, and said, "You really think this is about liking or not liking you?" I said, "What else would it be about?" He said, "Truth." The word hung in the air between us. He picked up his laptop and went upstairs. I sat alone again, staring at the 2 wine glasses on the counter, one half full, one untouched, and told myself that all of this was still just a misunderstanding that could be fixed with the right explanation. But deep down, for the first time, I wasn't sure what explanation would even make sense anymore. I kept telling myself people would forget, that the photo would fade under new scandals, that life would go back to how it used to be. But a month later, it was still everywhere. Not on the big pages anymore, but in private messages, whispered jokes, sideways looks. Every time I stepped into a room, it felt like the air shifted. At work, 2 colleagues stopped talking when I walked in. One of them quickly minimized her screen, but I saw my name on the tab. Family resemblance theory. I asked what they were looking at, pretending to sound amused. They mumbled something about recipes and left. I stood there smiling at the empty air until my face hurt. When I got home that evening, Evan was in the living room. The television was on but muted. Lila was on the rug drawing, her tongue sticking out in concentration. I said she should go wash her hands before dinner, and when she ran off, I sat on the couch beside him. He didn't move away, but he didn't turn toward me either. I asked if he'd eaten. He said yes. I said, "With anyone?" He said, "With silence." That tone again, the one that made every word sound like an entry in a file. I told him he was making things worse by refusing to act normal. He said, "I'm not acting." I noticed his phone on the coffee table. A small notification flashed, file uploaded successfully. My stomach twisted, but I tried to keep my voice light. I asked if he'd been working late again. He said, "Not late. Thorough." I said, "Thorough about what?" He said, "You'll see when it matters." That night I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge, and Lila's soft breathing through the baby monitor we still used out of habit. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the beach, about how it had all started. It was supposed to be a group trip, 5 couples, 3 kids, 1 week of sun. I booked it because I wanted something light, something fun, after months of what I called emotional drought. Evan didn't even want to go. He said he had deadlines, that the timing was bad. I told him deadlines never end, but summers do. He looked tired when he agreed. Cole was part of the same circle, a last-minute addition after his breakup. I hadn't seen him in months, not since that charity event where he'd joked that Evan was too calm for his own good. Back then, I laughed. I always laughed when people said things that secretly made sense. On the first night of the trip, the group gathered for dinner by the beach. The air smelled of grilled fish and sunscreen, and the ocean sounded close enough to touch. Cole kept making jokes, and everyone kept laughing. Even Evan smiled once or twice, though it didn't reach his eyes. I remember thinking he looked out of place, too serious in a world that was supposed to be carefree. By the third day, people started splitting into smaller groups. The others went sightseeing, and somehow it ended up being me, Cole, and Lila walking along the shore. She loved him immediately, probably because he made silly voices and threw shells into the waves for her to chase. I took pictures, dozens of them, Lila running, me laughing, the sunlight catching Cole's face. It felt harmless then, like moments I deserved after years of being the responsible one. That night, after Lila was asleep, Cole and I sat outside by the pool with a drink. He said I seemed lonely. I said he seemed nosy. He said Evan didn't look at me the way a husband should. I didn't argue, because a part of me wanted that to be true. It justified the warmth spreading in my chest when he brushed my arm. I told him not to make things complicated. He said, "They already are." The next morning, we took one last group photo before breakfast. I was tired, unguarded, laughing too much. Cole reached down to fix Lila's hat, and I took a quick selfie without thinking. That was the photo, the one everyone later analyzed like it was evidence in a trial. When I look at it now, I can't decide what's worse, how happy I look, or how right the rumors turned out to be. Back in the present, I caught myself staring at Lila while she played. Her small face, the curve of her smile, every detail felt like a question. I pushed the thought away. She was my daughter, our daughter. No one could take that from me. A week later, Evan suggested we have dinner with my mother. I thought maybe it meant he was softening. I dressed carefully, tried to act warm. Daphne met us at a quiet restaurant near her apartment. She hugged Evan, said he looked thinner, then spent most of the meal complaining about the online gossip. Evan barely spoke. He ate slowly, folded his napkin neatly, and only looked at me when I laughed too loudly. After dessert, my mother leaned forward and said, "You two just need to present unity. People can't attack what they can't divide." I smiled, said she was right. Evan said, "Unity requires honesty." I kicked him lightly under the table, but he didn't flinch. When we got home, he opened his laptop again. I asked if he was still working. He said, "Finishing touches." I said, "On what?" He said, "Closure." I pretended not to hear. Instead, I poured myself wine and watched him from the doorway. The soft glow from his screen lit up his face. His calm wasn't angry. It was final, and that scared me more than any fight could have. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the printer. I walked into the study and saw a stack of papers face down. I asked what they were. He said, "Copies." I said, "Of what?" He said, "What matters?" I tried to joke that he was turning into a bureaucrat, but he just smiled faintly and said, "At least bureaucrats keep records." Later that day, I went to pick up Lila from daycare. One of the teachers stopped me at the door. She said Evan had already picked her up early. My heart jumped, but when I got home, she was there, sitting at the table eating cereal. Evan said he'd wanted to spend time with her. I said he should have told me. He said, "I don't need permission to see my daughter." The way he said my daughter sounded deliberate. That night, I searched his side of the closet. Everything was still there, but rearranged. Files, envelopes, even a small USB taped under a folder labeled taxes. I stared at it for a long time, wondering what he'd stored there. I thought about pulling it off, but something stopped me. Maybe fear, maybe guilt. A few days later, I overheard my mother on the phone with him. She thought I was out of earshot. She said, "She's scared, Evan. Can't you at least talk to her?" I heard him reply, calm as ever, "We'll talk when it's time." When I confronted her, she said she only wanted to help. I asked what he'd meant by "when it's time." She shrugged, said he was probably just hurt, but her eyes didn't meet mine. That night, while I was putting Lila to bed, she asked if we were still a family. I said of course we were. She said, "Then why does Daddy always write things down?" I froze. She pointed to her little drawing pad. "He has a notebook like this, but boring. He writes dates." I said he was just working. She nodded, unconvinced. After she fell asleep, I stood in the hallway, listening. The faint scratching sound of a pen came from the guest room. Every line he wrote felt like another step away from me. I thought about the beach again, about how I'd told myself it was harmless, about how easy it had been to laugh, to feel desired, to believe that attention meant worth. I told myself I'd been lonely, that I deserved some spark. But the truth was simpler. I'd wanted proof I still mattered. Now all I had was proof of something else. Evan stopped speaking to me except about practical things, bills, Lila's schedule, groceries. Each conversation was short, polite, final. He'd become a shadow in his own house, but a deliberate one, always observing, always recording. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me, not with anger, but with quiet calculation, as if he was studying me for a role I didn't know I was playing. One morning, I found a new folder on his desk labeled Archive A. It was empty, except for one single sheet with the words "photo evidence" written on top. I felt my knees weaken. I tore it in half and threw it away, but that didn't help. The silence afterward was louder than ever. That evening, when he came home, I said, "You're not going to leave, are you?" He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Not until everything's settled." I asked what that meant, but he didn't answer. He picked up Lila, kissed her forehead, and said he'd read her a story. I stood there in the doorway, staring at the back of his head while he walked down the hall. I wanted to scream, to confess, to beg. But I didn't. I just whispered to myself, it was only a photo. And even then, I could feel that I didn't believe it anymore. It reached a point where even silence had a sound. A low hum under every word, every meal, every step through the house. Evan didn't argue, didn't accuse, but I could feel the weight of something building. He was colder, but not cruel. Precise, the kind of calm that felt like a countdown. One Saturday, he suggested we take Lila to the playground. It felt like a small peace offering, so I agreed. I dressed carefully, like appearance could fix what honesty couldn't. The park was crowded, families, strollers, children running between swings. Lila ran ahead, laughing, her hair bouncing in the sun. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Then I heard two mothers on the bench behind me whisper. One of them said my name. The other said, "That's her, the one from the photo." I turned slightly, pretending to check my phone. They weren't even subtle. "It's uncanny," one murmured. "The little girl looks nothing like the father." The other made a quiet sound that could have been sympathy or judgment. I couldn't tell which. Evan stood a few feet away, watching Lila climb the slide. His face didn't change. He must have heard them. I wanted him to defend me, to turn and say something, anything. But he didn't. He just crossed his arms, expressionless, and kept watching our daughter. I told myself he was being mature. But deep down, I knew it wasn't maturity. It was detachment. When we got home, I confronted him. I said, "You heard them. You just stood there." He said, "I've learned not to argue with strangers. They already believe what they want." I said, "So you believe them too?" He didn't answer. He just walked into the study and closed the door. I heard the faint click of the lock. Later that evening, I called my mother. I told her about the playground, about the whispers. She sighed and said, "People love drama. They need someone to point at so they can feel better about themselves." Then she lowered her voice and said, "But you should be careful. Evan's the quiet type. Quiet men never stay quiet forever." Her words sat heavy in my mind. The next week, I invited her and Evan to dinner at a family restaurant, hoping to ease the tension. Daphne showed up early, dressed like she was meeting royalty. She kissed Lila, complimented Evan's shirt, and told me to let the men lead tonight. When Evan arrived, he looked sharp but tired. He greeted her politely, asked about her health, then sat across from me. I tried to fill the silence with small talk about work, about how people were finally posting new things online. My mother smiled at me, but I could see her eyes flick toward Evan now and then. She was testing the temperature. Halfway through the meal, she leaned forward and said, "You two need to stop letting gossip control you. People forget quickly if you act unbothered." Evan wiped his hands carefully with a napkin before replying. "I'm not bothered," he said. "I'm just documenting what happens." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. My mother frowned. "Documenting?" she asked. He nodded. "When truth gets buried under noise, records help." I felt my pulse quicken. I said, "You make it sound like a trial." He looked at me then, finally meeting my eyes. "Trials need lies," he said. "I'm not lying." The air around us went still. My mother tried to smooth things over, saying, "We're all just emotional. Families fight and forgive." Evan smiled faintly. "Forgiveness follows acknowledgement." He finished his meal calmly, paid the bill before anyone could argue, and stood. "Thank you for dinner," he said. "I'll take Lila home. You two should talk." After he left, my mother stared at me like she was finally seeing what she'd missed. "He's preparing something," she said quietly. "You can feel it." I told her she was being paranoid. She shook her head. "No, he's planning." When I got home, the house was spotless. Lila was asleep, her stuffed rabbit tucked beside her. I went into the study. The printer light glowed faintly, blinking in standby. On the desk sat a sealed envelope addressed with both our names. I picked it up. It was blank otherwise. No logo, no return address. I turned it over in my hands, debating whether to open it. Evan's voice startled me from the doorway. "That's not for tonight," he said. I froze. "Then what is it?" He walked past me, opened the drawer, and placed the envelope inside. "It's order," he said. "Something this house hasn't had in a while." I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, but his composure stopped me. Instead, I said, "You're scaring me." He looked at me then, calm, unreadable. "I'm not trying to. I'm trying to be clear." I said, "About what?" He hesitated for a moment, then said, "About what comes next." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just said it like a man who had already accepted the ending. I followed him down the hall, still arguing, still trying to make him explain. But he just picked up his jacket and said, "You wanted independence, remember? I'm giving you that. Properly." He left before I could respond. I stood there in the doorway, listening to the car engine start, fade, and disappear down the street. The house felt colder than ever. The envelope's absence from the desk drawer lingered in my mind. I told myself it was nothing, that he was bluffing, that he'd cool off like always. But when I checked the study again later that night, I noticed new folders on the shelf, one labeled bank statements, another school records, and there, taped under the drawer like a secret, another USB, labeled with today's date. I touched it but didn't remove it. My hand trembled. Somewhere in the quiet, I realized I no longer knew which version of myself he had recorded, or how long he'd been collecting the truth I refused to face. The house had become too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Every sound mattered now. The kettle, the rustle of papers, the soft click of the door when Evan left before sunrise. He didn't need to say anything. His absence said enough. Each morning I woke to cold air, and the faint smell of his coffee. My cup was always untouched. He'd stopped leaving notes, stopped making small talk. The space between us was measured now, deliberate. Even the rooms felt different, like they'd been rearranged to fit his new calm. The wedding photo was gone from the hallway. I noticed the empty nail, the clean rectangle where the frame used to hang. When I asked him about it, he said, "I'm making space." I said, "For what?" He said, "Reality." At work, Mara cornered me by the copier. She said people were still talking about the trip photo, that it had reappeared in a local gossip thread. She said, "They're saying he's preparing something legal." I laughed, said she'd been watching too many dramas. But that word, legal, stuck in my head all day. I messaged Cole, asked if anyone had reached out to him. He replied hours later. "I got some strange calls. I'm not sure what's happening, but maybe we should stop talking for a while." I typed back, "You can't just disappear." He didn't answer. That night, I cooked dinner for 3, even though Evan barely ate anymore. He thanked me politely and said, "You don't have to pretend." I said, "Pretend what?" He looked up. "That this is still a marriage." My throat tightened. "We have a child," I said. He nodded. "Exactly." After dinner, he went into the study again. I stood in the hallway, listening to the hum of the printer. When I peeked through the door, he was sorting papers into stacks. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Putting things in order." I tried to laugh it off. "You're turning into an accountant." He said, "No, I'm turning into someone who keeps proof." The next morning, a form from Lila's school lay on the counter. Her emergency contact had been changed. Only Evan's name was listed. My stomach twisted. When I confronted him, he said calmly, "It's simpler this way." I said, "Simpler for who?" He said, "For her." Later, I went through the drawers in the study. Every folder was labeled now. Household, bank, school, medical. Even the digital folders on his computer were color-coded. When I clicked one, it asked for a password. I stared at the locked screen, wondering when my home had turned into an archive. That evening, I found him in the living room helping Lila with a puzzle. She looked happy, safe. He smiled at her, not me. When she went to bed, I said, "You're cutting me out." He said, "I'm clarifying things." I told him he was scaring me. He said, "I'm not angry, Isola. I'm just finished guessing." The way he said it made me dizzy. At night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through old messages with Cole. They felt distant now, like they belonged to another person. The laughter, the flirting, the little sparks I'd mistaken for meaning. I deleted a few threads, then stopped. Deleting them felt like admitting guilt, and I wasn't guilty. At least that's what I told myself. The next day, my mother called. She said Evan had been asking about property details, joint accounts, things responsible men check before a separation. I snapped that she shouldn't take his side. She said, "I'm not taking sides, dear. I'm telling you he's already making moves." When Evan came home that night, I confronted him. "You're talking to my mother behind my back." He said, "I'm talking to whoever keeps facts straight." I shouted that he was treating me like a suspect. He said, "You've been treating yourself like one for months." He didn't yell. He just looked tired, as if everything had already been decided. He picked up a manila envelope from the counter and sealed it carefully. I asked what it was. He said, "Just something that needs to be delivered." I followed him as he headed to the door. "Delivered where?" He stopped, hand on the handle. "To the proper place," he said. My voice broke. "Evan, please, we can fix this." He turned, his expression unreadable. "Fixing starts with truth. You've had chances." Then he left. I stood there for a long time, staring at the envelope he'd taken with him, feeling a cold certainty settle in my chest. I wanted to believe it was another empty threat, another wave of drama that would fade, like the rumors online. But deep down I knew this wasn't drama anymore. It was documentation. It was evidence being built calmly, page by page, by the man I'd thought was too gentle to ever fight back. It happened in daylight, outside the courthouse. Evan stood a few steps away, while a uniformed officer handed me a sealed envelope. Inside were the documents: petition for paternity testing and custody arrangements. People nearby slowed to watch. Cole's name was printed clearly, undeniable. I looked up at Evan, but he didn't smile or gloat. He just nodded once as if everything had finally become clear.